New York Times recently published an article that was almost disgustingly unfair to electric cars, but guess what? They did not mention Tesla because mentioning Tesla actually would have gone against their concept that electric cars will suck. Now, Clean Technica, as you can see in this screenshot, kind of rebuffed most of it. But I have to say that I do have to say, as much as I don't like what New York Times did, there is some truth to it. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons I bought a Chevy Volt and did not continue driving my Tesla on long distance. So let's discuss this. As a matter of fact, because it's Wednesday, Eli Burton of My Tesla Adventure is going to be here, and he has, as always, a little bit of a different opinion than I do. So we're going to discuss this coming up next. Welcome to E4Electric, your #1 source of unbiased electric car news. If this is your first time here, go ahead and click on that subscribe button down there so you don't miss anything moving forward. All right, so as you can see, this article is basically what stirred things up in the electric car universe. Here's the original article, and we'll go over what's wrong with that. And of course, in just 1 second, Eli is going to be here to give us his opinion on this. But before that, a quick reminder that this video and this channel is sponsored by Byton. Check out the all-electric SUV called M-Byte, available in the US and Europe at the end of next year, 2020. $45,000, the starting price. That's before the incentives. And go ahead and reserve yours today. It really costs $0 in about a minute of your time. Myself and over 50,000 other people have already done so. So go to that link and reserve your Byton today. All right, without further ado, let me bring Eli on and get his opinion about this. Eli, how are you doing, my friend?
Alex, how's it going, man? It's good to be back.
Yes, yes. Well, you're not physically back. You're just back on the channel.
Good to be back on the show. Yep, I'm still here in Metro Manila, right in the heart of BGC.
All right. Well, I'm glad to have you because this is actually, you know, you pick the topics for this, and you insisted that we definitely do this one for this Wednesday, and that's why I kind of held off doing my own story about it. So why don't you tell our viewers what the original article was from New York Times, and then kind of a rebuttal that you, from what I understand, did on Twitter, and Clean Technica did on their website as well.
Yeah, so this article actually first came to me on Twitter because somebody else I follow immediately kind of tweeted back at this and kicked off, which was a very heated, response by a number of members of the electric car community. Basically, New York Times put out this piece, titled "LA to Vegas and Back: Electric Car, 8 hours by driving, 5 hours more plugged in." And as you follow through the story, they basically figured out a way to have the slowest road trip possible going from these two locations. It's a location, by the way, the average drive is not 500 miles that most people are doing. So, I mean, they did everything they could in this article to basically make it look like electric vehicles suck. Nobody should drive electric vehicles. They're not a good option for anyone. And only a handful of crazy people are the ones who do it. Now, they managed to, in every performance factor that is actually solved by Tesla by either having further range or faster charging, they completely ignored the brand entirely and only focused on this Bolt. Like, I mean, calling this article a story about electric vehicles is a total lie. It's really a story about this one Bolt and this one road trip that they tried to overgeneralize to really smear the electric vehicle industry entirely.
All right, so now let's back up a little bit. They basically said, listen, it was 8 hours of driving, and then we had to charge so much, spend so much time charging throughout the trip to make those 8 hours that it totaled up to 5. Now, Clean Technical came out and said, BS, and there are a few reasons for that. Now, I mentioned that somehow, on the hit piece on electric cars, they actually shied away from Tesla, which normally is the subject of all of the EVs are bad type of topics. Well, because they picked Chevy Bolt for some reason, and Chevy Bolt is, if you can find one car that's really not gonna do well with charging, it was not meant to be enough for the long trips, is Chevy Bolt. The maximum charge is 80 kilowatts, which is not that bad, but they also ended up using, and that's what they have in their actually a story or crap. Yeah, that's Chevy Bolt, but I was going to show you the actual New York Times picture. There you go. So they have an EV Go station there, as you can see, and EV Go stations in this case could not charge that car from on more than 50 kilowatts, right? So it was slower than it could have been. Now, if they were using Electrify America ones, and this is the picture I took myself in one of the here in California, Livermore, California, then that car would be able to charge on its maximum rate of 80 kilowatts and charge less. But even with the calculations they've done, even that didn't come up to 5 hours. And of course, then they also compared other cars like Kia Niro and Tesla for sure, where the charge time was way, way less. So that's just in a nutshell. Now, one thing I don't quite understand is this chart for Model 3. So look at this. I mean, I just don't think this is the best way to present information. If you ask me, I still not quite understand what's going on there and how they got that time. But for this one, the charge time is 1 hour and 24 minutes, and I believe the trip is 7.5 hours or so forth, because I believe it was like back and forth. So, tell us, what are the best vehicles as we know right now, besides, obviously Tesla and others that could make that trip much faster? And, should we start separating electric cars that are for long distance driving and the ones that are just for urban driving for the shorter distances and not for long distances?
If you actually wanted to give a fair journalistic look at electric vehicles, that's what you would do, right? So there's these cars, what is it, like the BMW i3 that does 100 miles, obviously designed for a commuter car, which, by the way, most people do not drive more than 100 miles for their commute. And then one of the things we were actually talking about on a recent segment, Alex, and you were saying is that really the car that's really going to be needed for people is about 200 miles, right? Because the majority of driving trips are happening under that range and won't involve charging. In fact, most Tesla owners who have vehicles that do anywhere from, low 220s with the short range version all the way up to the new longest range versions doing 370 never actually have to supercharge, right? There is a unbelievable amount of Teslas out there that have only been plugged into a supercharger a handful of times, and they would do so on a trip like this. I mean, if you'd done this trip on a long range Model 3, going to your destination assuming you left your starting point with full battery, which is advised to do if you're going on a long trip, you would only have to charge once and probably for about 10 minutes. Because long range Model 3 is doing over 300 miles of range, and we're talking a drive that's about 260 miles. If you're doing it in the long range Model S or the new Raven Model S, you're not stopping and charging at all. You're just charging overnight at your destination. So I think the real problem with this is that they chose a trip that is very long. They chose the worst pure electric vehicle pretty much that they could that is still reasonable to use for a long distance trip, tried to overgeneralize it to the entire industry, and then they still didn't use the best technology available, meaning that they used 50 kilowatt chargers instead of 80. Also, too, they make this claim that this is a trip that's done frequently by people. There may be people who do this trip frequently. Most people do not frequently do trips of this length. So it's kind of a non-issue. And they kind of also, too, in the article, give this whole frame that like these quotes from these people who are just like, oh, we want to go to electric, but, it's about 100 miles round trip to go to my mother's house, and I just can't do it. There are plenty of cars that you can do a 100-mile round trip of 100 miles and go visiting family. Even 200 miles, 300 miles when you're talking about the Model 3 and Model S, and even now the long-range Model X. So I was just kind of shaking my head at this, and a lot of us kind of went at them on Twitter about it, and they really didn't respond in any substantive way because the positions they were holding is kind of indefensible to take this one car and generalize it to the entire industry.
Now, here's the thing that I agree with everything you said. However, I have, as you know, even when I had a Tesla, I ended up buying a Volt about a year ago because I essentially did not like my trip of going from San Francisco Bay Area to Los Angeles of 5 hours and having
And for those that are listening watching, your Tesla was a 60 kilowatt. You got about 180 miles of usable range?
Yeah.
180 miles.
Right. So, which is more than most of the electric cars, and I still ended up having to charge for a couple of hours. And actually, there was the same thing with my 75D. So those two cars were very equal, maybe an extra 10 or 15 minutes that was added for the 60 kilowatts. But nevertheless, to me, driving 5 hours versus driving 7 hours, it was a difference. I usually drive in the evening to avoid LA traffic, so it was a difference between getting to bed at 2 a.m., which was still kind of acceptable, and 4 a.m., which was completely unacceptable. And I ended up saying, okay, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to have to use a little bit of gas because I need to make these trips, and I can't be going to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning when I have to get up and work in the morning of that same day. Now, a lot of people really were not very happy with me because I had to use a little bit of gas, and absolutely stand by it. And this is why I think if New York Times wanted to highlight the aspect of electric cars that are still lagging behind, they could have done that in that article with still realistic numbers, because 2 hours for a 5-hour trip to me is just as unacceptable, really. But I know you love supercharging because you love meeting people at superchargers. You got your own stuff that you're doing there, on your social media and so forth. Well, how do we reconcile this?
I also just upgraded my car too, and for one reason, so that I could now avoid having to supercharge pretty much altogether. So I'll now be able to do my round trip drive to the Bay, and I can even go from where I'm at in Sacramento to LA, to where I typically go in LA, and I'll only need one supercharging stop for about 15 minutes. So like I actually just I just upgraded to the latest and greatest and the best range to help eliminate my requirement to charge. Right? Like there are places I'll stop and charge. Like I always stop at Kettleman City because I love the experience. I love meeting with owners, and that's just to enhance my experience of the trip. But now with this new range on this new car, I don't have to stop and charge at all.
Right. Well, I mean, in all fairness, not everybody has $100,000 to spend on this. And pretty soon they won't have to, because in another few years, this should be a relatively common range, and the charging would be faster. But, at this point, right, I mean, we're talking about right now, because the article's about saying, like, why more people are not buying electric cars. And, the concern, which I think is valid, is the long distance trip still takes way more time in an electric car than on a gas car that takes about 3 minutes to recharge, refuel. And even somebody like me who's a huge electric car fan, it's unacceptable. So I thought they could have written the same article with actual facts, right? Use the Tesla, use the superchargers, and still come up with a notion saying, listen, we drove a gas car to LA and the total refueling time was 7 minutes. We drove a Tesla and it was over an hour. Holy crap, this is unacceptable. And then they might have had some point. But what would be the counterpoint to that? Because people like you, and even before you bought this particular car, were more than happy to do that. Tell me, why did you buy into that?
I think the counterpoint to saying that, okay, it's an hour of charging for a 5 or 6 or 7 hour drive, the counterpoint to that is that most people are not doing that drive very often, if ever, right? That is a very rare, that distance of drive is very rare for most people. And I think for a lot of people, and that's part of the reason why we're not seeing it be an issue for adoptions of Teslas, they're okay with that travel time on the rare circumstances where they make that long drive. Now, if you're somebody that's going from San Francisco to LA all the time, you can't afford to get, the long range Model S. You've got to get a shorter range car. You've got a decision to make. Are you willing to take that trade-off of a couple hours of charging for a more comfortable experience in autopilot, having, cheaper energy cost via superchargers versus gasoline? And that's a calculation you have to make. But that is at least being reasonable and comparing a true apples to apples of, what the typical best of the, gas industry is offering with ICE cars and what actually the leading electric vehicles are. I think that would be a fair comparison. If they were to say, hey, look, an hour off the road is unacceptable, you know what, that's fine. But at least we're talking about real data here. The fact that they spent 5 hours plugged in this travel here, I mean, you have to be trying to take that long. Right?
Yeah,
like if you actually left with a full charged at your destination, used the fast superchargers, there's you shave hours off this. Yeah. Now, granted, let's say you spend 2 hours plugged in, then you know what it tells people? That maybe the Chevy Bolt is not a good solution for them if they're going to be doing a lot of long distance driving. Yeah. But that doesn't mean there isn't that electric vehicles are bad and that there's no electric car solution for everyone. I mean, they're basically trying to say, look, it's too early for electric cars. In a few years, it'll be okay. I mean, even when they talk about Tesla's supercharging, they do a good job of cherry picking how they present that too. So they talk about just the number of locations, not the number of chargers. They kind of highlight it as, Tesla's still investing money. They're still kind of growing their net. Like they try and make it sound like these infrastructure isn't really well baked out. If you look at the Tesla supercharging map, it blankets the United States. It covers very dense coverage in Europe. Like they're trying to make it seem like the technology is not as far there as it is. And that's why it seemed very clear to me that this is a big oil sponsored hit piece because, it doesn't seem like something the automakers are necessarily doing, but it definitely has all of the taste of a big oil sponsored attack against electric vehicles. Because if you read this and you didn't know anything about electric vehicles, you would walk away from this saying, nope, it's still not time to buy an electric car.
So this is, I think, we're also this is where we disagree. But before I say that, let me also walk back to the other side and say when in early days when I was also okay with supercharging for a while was also because the gas prices were pretty high, supercharging was free, and I was like, well, I'm sitting there for an extra couple of hours, but guess what? I just saved myself $100 on this trip. And so I was okay with that. I'm a little bit busier now. Supercharging is not as free as it used to be, especially for the later models and so forth. So my situation has changed. But I do have to say that the cost of how much money you save, supercharging or even fast charging when you do have to pay, essentially makes up for the time that you've lost. But here's where I disagree here because I don't think either one of us have enough information to make that claim unless you prove me wrong here. I don't think this is why New York Times and Bloomberg TV and everything is going against the electric cars. I don't think that all executives are sitting there and trying to stuff the suitcases with cash and bring it to New York Times and Bloomberg, right? I think what they're doing.
What do you think's happening?
So there are a couple of things. One, I think that oil companies right now are not that worried about it because only 1% of all car sales are electric, so they're far away from even losing sleep over this. And what they are doing is that they're buying electric charging stations and providers. And now even Shell has a program where they're essentially putting them into their gas stations. So sooner or later, they'll just simply switch and take our money and sell the energy in a different ways. And they'll probably get into energy products like Tesla is pioneering right now. I think that's what they're doing. I think the reason...
Well, first off, big oil doesn't have to just put money in suitcases. They can straight up give money to these private companies through purchasing of ads. I mean, there's tons of ways that you can give that businesses can influence each other legitimately, especially for news agencies whose entire revenue is based upon ad purchasing. And as we know, the majority of ad purchasing is done by automakers and the gas-powered industry. The other side of that is, oil companies are going to be smart and get into the energy business, but there's still going to be trillions of barrels of oil that they can't pump out of the ground and make revenue off. So it's to their advantage that electric vehicles take absolutely as long as possible. I mean, it's to their financial advantage that the electrification of everything takes as long as possible. But if they're not behind pieces like this, then who is?
Okay.
Because this is willful. I mean, you have to intentionally cherry pick information here to make a piece look that like this didn't happen on accident.
Yes.
You intentionally ignored a whole lot of data to make this piece work.
This was
who's behind that then if they're not?
This was intentional a bigotry, if you will. Again, I'm not worried. I don't think the oil companies are worried. I think they will smoothly make a transition of taking our money and selling energy in different ways. Instead of oil rigs, they will build the solar farms and it'll be just fine. I think that's where they're at. Yes, they're annoyed with this, but this is progress and I think they'll be fine.
The profit on solar farms and all those things is going to be so much less. Switching to clean energy will ultimately lose them money, even if they're the holders of the clean energy, a large part of the holders of the clean energy providers.
I think they'll be fine. But okay, so I don't think that's what's happening. I also don't think they're buying it through advertisement because if they get caught doing that, those newspapers will go belly up like tomorrow, right? And I think these journalists, as wrong as they might be, still have...
Why would that be the case? Because, I mean, look at Wall Street. I mean, the amount of articles that come out and of media articles about companies are driven by both directions of people manipulating the stock, whether it be hit pieces drive the stock down or bulls trying to drive the stock up. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie Wall Street, but that's basically a documentary. And that is nothing but market manipulation through the media. And that's well known that a large number of media outlets are paid off one way or the other for the content they put out, or it's done via relationships. I mean, propaganda is rampant, especially in the financial sector. And I don't see Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg or any of these other institutions going anywhere as a result of doing something that most people in the know that's happening. So like I don't think it's accurate to assume that if they were really doing this, they'd lose their reputation, because it's rampant in the financial sector.
Yeah. It makes me sad because I mean I get accused a lot of times that whenever I do something, a negative piece about Tesla or another company, it's because Biden is paying me, right? So maybe that's why I hate that, because I mean I consider myself a journalist with integrity, and the money that Biden pays.
See, it drives me crazy all that. Like every single video now, I see people commenting about your sponsorship in Biden. Like what they don't get is that Biden is not paying for you to give an opinion on them. They are paying for the ability for your audience to gain more information and attention to their brand. They're paying for exposure on your show.
Yeah, and it's weird because I literally put in contract with Biden that I can actually show whoever wants to see that part of the agreement that I have with all sponsors that says they have zero control over my content. I've lost advertisers over this who didn't want to do that. But what I'm saying is that when, people claim that, Chevron is paying off Bloomberg to make this hit piece on electric cars, I also fall into category where people feel free to say, well, Alex does, negative pieces on Tesla because Biden's paying. I'm just saying it's all kind of pretty sad. But let me answer your question.
No, I get what you're saying though too. And also too, like you're a guy, right? This is your show, and that harm to your brand can matter. But we're talking about a brand as big as the New York Times, a handful of pieces that had a motivation behind them aren't like the brand's got such a large audience and doing so well, at least for now. The mainstream media has been able to kind of get away with what they want. It's only now because of the internet that they even have competitors, right? They've had a monopoly on information for a long time.
Yeah, and I am one of them. So, okay, but let me tell you why I think these pieces are actually out there. I think it's all about the audience, right? Like I make my videos because there's audience out there of people who like electric cars, but they want sort of a, unbiased opinion, independent opinion about good and bad about and cover all the brands, right? Now, it's a small audience, granted, right? I'm not as big as, those YouTubers who only, love Elon Musk and, talk about Tesla and stuff like that, or blogs and so forth. But my audience is that, and I feed them with the same type of information. I think those pieces of New York Times is the same thing. They have an audience of grumpy old men who don't like progress, who don't understand the cell phones and electric cars and text messaging and stuff like that. So anytime somebody says how they're right and get off my lawn, they will read it and they will buy the newspaper. So I think really this is as simple as catering to your audience, which is still mainly anti-electric car. That's my theory.
I mean, I don't believe that's the case, but if that is the case, so this is just intentionally mislead. Like it's still the same thing. They're just doing it for a different motivation. Now it's to pander to their audience. It's bad journalism. Either way, this is absolutely garbage journalism.
Yeah, this is horrible.
Now, for me, seeing this, it's compromised for me. Anything that I see coming out of the New York Times, because this article is so misleading and so intentionally cherry picking. I'm willing to call it flat out lying about an entire industry.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. And this is this is why people don't like me, is because now I'm going to call out the electric car industry, Tesla and Kia and Biden and everybody, because this is an opportunity, right? And I'm going to flat out tell everybody, I am writing an email to Biden within the last 24 hours stating we should do this, which is let's do two things: promote electric cars and cut down on misinformation. And Elon Musk tweeting, and trolling New York Times after this and all of this stuff is not going to help. Here's what I'm proposing. Why don't we take an electric car, okay, and then we drive the same distance that they said. We use the Electrify America, or Tesla can use superchargers. We stop in every city while doing all of this, pick up a fresh copy of New York Times and create a stack on the back of our cars and make it back in 1/5 or half of their time and say, there you go. That would be great publicity for electric cars, and obviously a great way to fight the disinformation. But who's going to do it?
I'd love to be part of that road trip, by the way. That sounds like my type of thing.
But where's Tesla's marketing department with this? Oops, it doesn't exist. Where's Kia?
Well, where's the car that was targeted in this, which is Chevy? Right? Like this article went after the Bolt. Where are they?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So, I mean, I'm going to write out, and actually, you know what? It probably doesn't make sense to write it to Biden because I don't have a car yet. But I am actually going to write an email to Kia and Chevy and well, not going to write it to Tesla because we all know what's going to happen with that. But this is an opportunity that our side here is missing out on a lot of times, and we reserve to what I really don't like what's happening when Elon Musk just decides to tweet all these memes and all that stuff, and everybody gets riled up, where we have an opportunity to actually fight this with facts. We have video cameras on it, and we can prove it how wrong they are. And we're going to do nothing about it. Maybe Elon Musk will get in trouble replying to this, but we do nothing. And unfortunately, that's the worst thing we can do in this community. And this is why I only have 40,000 subscribers and not 400,000 subscribers, because everybody gets riled up against me and people who are calling out this industry saying, let's do this. Let's not send out tweets. Let's get the video camera and prove them wrong. And everybody just sits there. And that's unfortunate.
There's a place for both, though. Like, if they're going to come out and lie, there's nothing wrong with calling them out for doing it. However, yeah, I agree. I think also making the content to be like, hey, look how this actually goes, I think we absolutely needs to happen.
Yeah. Well, let me see if any of them reply. And if you want to be part of it, I would love to do it. Now, we're definitely not going to be using your car because it's just too good of an electric car. So you're disqualified, Eli, okay? But maybe we'll get a key or something like that and we'll prove them wrong. And definitely it would be a nice touch, I thought, picking up New York Times in every city that we visit. So, all right, man. Now it's time for me to call my therapist and get my blood pressure down after this. I appreciate you participating. But before you go, as always, please tell us what's next on your podcast.
Yeah, so next on the Tesla Geek Show, actually our next episode, we just had one of our spotlight episodes where we bring on a member of the community and talk about what they're doing. And in fact, we're going to be doing a spotlight episode here in a couple weeks with Alex, who's to be for Electric here. But we just had, we just had Sofian on. You can take a look at him on Twitter. He's probably most known for, Tesla actually follows him on Twitter. And one of the things that he's done, he's an owner, big advocate, fan, and he actually, although he has a full-time job, he signed up for Uber and Lyft and uses that as a way to expose people to the cars. So he's got a lot of fun stories and a lot of fun content from that.
Excellent. Well, I love it. As always, our videos that we post has a link to your podcast so people can check it out. I'm looking forward to being a guest and maybe raising my blood pressure once again. We should get some interesting topic for that. But listen, I know you'll be back next Wednesday to once again do this still over the internet, but nevertheless, you'll be only 20 miles away. Thanks so much. Safe travels.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, guys. Well, just like I said, this segments are supposed to be about Eli talking and not me, and I totally took over. I apologize for that, but I really feel really strongly about it. And I think this is a great opportunity. And, I really just thought of it. I'm just going to go ahead and email these PR people that I know and see maybe they'll take me up on this. And if Eli can participate, that will be absolutely awesome. There's nobody else that I would rather do it with than with Eli, or maybe Tom will join us as well from Inside of Ease. Quick reminder for all of you guys, go to participate with our bonus story of the week that we send out every Saturday. Go to e4electric.com/VIP. Want to give a quick shout out to one of my newer Patreons, Kyle Mahan, who's supporting me on Patreon for this show to stay independent. Thank you so much. And you get to watch me live, not just on Tuesday on YouTube, but every day there. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to your comments, which I'm sure already started as soon as this video was posted. Other than that, see you next time. And remember to stay charged.